all for tuning in to today's alumni interview podcast. Today, this interview is specifically for the visual and performing arts career community. I'm Marissa Lake, and today I'm with Jeni Houser, who is class of 2006, and she is a freelance opera singer. Jeni, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. I'm having a nice day off between dress rehearsals, so it's a
Oh,
pleasure to
yes.
be here talking to you.
Yes, that's always so good. I love those days off in the middle of
They're
all of the
magic.
rehearsals.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, I'm really glad to be here. Lawrence was a very important part of my journey and who I am, and I'm so glad always to talk to folks in the community.
How did you get interested in working in the classical music industry?
Well, music was always just how I spent a ton of my time, and one of the most important things to me. I started playing piano when I was 4, and I always sang with my family and, in choirs, and I started playing flute in middle school, and then some guitar, and took lessons at, just explored all of the musical things when I was growing up. And I think the reason that I wanted to go into it as a career was that it was the world of music was where I got the most of that sort of tingly feeling. And I think for a lot of us who are in the arts especially, you find that thing that gives you that tingly feeling and that sense of
Mhm.
sort of connection with the world, with other people, with yourself. And you think, I want to spend as much of my time as possible doing that. And in our world today, that usually means that you want to make that your career, because that is how our society is structured, is that we spend a
Mhm.
lot of our times doing our careers. So I will say that where I thought I would be within the classical music industry is very different from where I've ended up. I
Mhm.
absolutely thought that I would be a music teacher, and choral music was my sort of first love. And when I came to Lawrence, I did a double degree in music education and English, and I was gung ho about teaching high school choir. I thought that's where I would end up, and somewhere along the way, I was working really hard on my singing and performing, and I realized that that was really getting me excited, and I wanted to spend even more time on that, and it felt like such an interesting challenge. So that was when I sort of made the turn into the world of performing, and then after I graduated from Lawrence, I did my student teaching and then had a long-term sub position at an elementary school. So I really got a good taste of the teaching life. And
Mhm.
then I moved to New York City. That was when I sort of learned about the industry, the world of opera specifically, and what it takes to be in that world. And, worked with a voice teacher out there and did some professional choral gigs, and just kind of dipped my toes in and figured out what it would take to get into that career. And then I went back to grad school and got a master's in voice performance. And then from then on, I've really been in the professional opera world. So yeah, it had a couple twists and turns, but I think that I always knew that I would spend a lot of my time making music.
Yeah, I mean, twists and turns is like so expected as an artist almost. Like you have one idea in your head and then a couple years later it just like completely changes. And I think everybody just has like very similar stories with that, even students currently at Lawrence. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that because like, I don't know, we have to accept the twists and turns, as you keep going through things. So,
I think that's absolutely true. And if there's one thing that I always try to tell young singers, it's that none of us are on a straight and narrow path. It's
mhm,
just, it looks that way in retrospect. When you tell someone your path, they're like, oh, of course, that's what you did. But when you're living it, it doesn't feel that way for anyone, I think. There's
mhm.
always junctures where you make choices, there's always unexpected roadblocks, and everyone's path is a little different. So I think really breathing into that and
Mhm.
accepting that that's what it is a really great thing to come out of college thinking. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah, really good point.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into like the next question. So, what advice do you have for those that are interested in being classical singers?
I think if you want to be a singer, it just takes a lot of self-discipline. So you have to find out what motivates you, what it is that you love about it, what it is that makes you want to spend time on it every single day when no one is forcing you. Because once you're done with school in this career, you schedule your own lessons, your own coachings, and sometimes when you're in the life, you might go months without having check-ins with coaches or teachers. Sometimes we have months between gigs, you know, so making sure that you're learning the next music that you need to know, making sure that you're continuing to work on your craft. It really all is up to you. And we're all motivated by different things. So I really think that all learning styles, all personality styles can succeed as singers, but it looks a little different. How you spend your time and where you put your energy, it looks a little different for everyone. My husband and I are like polar opposites in how we work on music and how we, you know, what we love about this career. So it looks different for both of us, but it does take just a lot of sort of self-directed action. The other thing I would say is that there used to be this idea that you really had to be all in to be a singer, like it had to be the only thing you cared about. And I think that's changing a lot. And I think that being as curious as possible, pursuing your other interests as well, I think that just adds to your depth as a performer and gives you emotional and mental reserves to fall back on when things are tough. You know, this is a career where you deal with a lot of rejection, a lot of criticism, a lot of uncertainty, which we've all been become very used to now with the pandemic, unfortunately. But that's sort of the nature of the beast with this job in general, because it's freelance and sort of gig by gig. So I think anything you have to draw on that sort of gives you spark, gives you life, is great. And then finding how you stay motivated.
You're a freelance artist, so
Yes.
like why did you choose to work for your specific organization, like the one that you're with right now, or like what other ones have you worked with in the past?
Well, right now I am at Opera Theater of St. Louis, which does a spring summer festival season. So I've been here for actually about a month, and I've got about a month left of this gig. We open our production of Magic Flute this Saturday, which I assume will be in the past when folks can hear this podcast. So we're into performances now when you're listening to this. But yeah, you know, every gig is a 3-week to several month long individual sort of experience. And you know, I've auditioned for tons of companies through the years. I've been hired back at companies I've worked at previously. Sometimes my schedule has been booked out several years in advance, at least with some of the gigs. And sometimes I get things really last minute. So it really sort of varies how you get the gigs and which companies you're working with and for how long. I have been very, very fortunate to work at some really great companies. I made my Metropolitan Opera debut just before the pandemic. I've worked at Los Angeles Opera, Dallas Opera. I've covered at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. I did a world premiere production at Vienna State Opera. I've worked with Minnesota and Madison Operas, Cincinnati, Central City. So all over the United States. I was in Asia for the first time this spring singing at the Seoul Arts Center. So it's been a really varied and interesting life to be a singer like this. And one of the things I most love about it is getting to know all these different places and being in them usually for a little while. So I have like a little restaurant or coffee shop that I become kind of a regular at, or I get to know the parks and go for walks and things. So that's one of my favorite things about it is that variety. And it can also be a real challenge of the career. But yeah, I feel super lucky that I've, been around the world a little bit.
I know so many people with any kind of freelancing job, not necessarily just in music, but kind of freelance anything. Travel is like a huge component of that people really want to do. And so it's really cool to hear your stories about it as well. Usually there are 2 different paths that you can take. So it's the freelance route, or you could also seek out more, not final contracts, but like longer contracts with companies. Can you talk a little bit more about the longer contracts with companies and how that works?
In the United States, when you get started as an opera singer, there are apprenticeships that are year-long or sometimes multi-year contracts with a particular company where you cover the leading roles, sing supporting roles, get a variety of types of different experiences. They, usually they bring in master teachers to do master classes, and, you really get a taste of the business, but all at this one company. Once you're out of that sort of apprentice phase, or YAP phase, as we call it in opera world, which stands for Young Artist Program, there really aren't full-time gigs, long-term gigs in the United States. So it's a unique sort of setup compared to a lot of other performers. Like dancers tend to be in a company, and that's where you make your career. And eventually you might switch companies, but you kind of build up within one company. And we don't really have that. However, a lot of the opera that's happening in the world is happening in Europe and specifically in Germany. There are just a ton of houses in large, medium, and small German cities. Germany, Switzerland, Austria, there's a lot of opera happening there, and they have what are called Fest contracts, which are full-time ensemble positions. And ensemble in this case doesn't mean you're singing in the chorus. It means that you are considered to be part of the ensemble at that house, and you sing a bunch of roles through the season with them. And, they're able to do that at those houses because they perform a lot more opera than we do here. So if you're in Frankfurt, Germany, where my sister lives, and which has a really great opera house, they're doing operas 6 nights a week and almost all year. So it's just a very different amount, the saturation, and people are coming, people are buying tickets and going to those shows. It also tends to be state funded over there, whereas here it's really dependent on patrons. It's really dependent on, individuals and corporations giving money as opposed to like state funding. So that also changes the amount of opera that's happening. And there's just a different tradition, right? Like it's just a much more popular art form with the general public than I think is the case in most places in the States. A lot of companies are working to try to change that here and are trying to get more performances going and do more things in the community and bring in different populations. And it's really interesting to see how folks are approaching that in the States. But there are a couple companies that have been playing with or moving toward more of a resident format, which is a little closer to the Fest thing in Germany. So I know that Opera San Jose, for instance, has had residents who sing a lot, the bigger roles and things. So it's not the same as a Yap. But yeah, there's just not as much of that. So you kind of, I know a lot of singers who go do audition tours in Germany and try to kind of land one of those jobs, maybe at least to get started in their career and just get a lot of roles under their belt. That seems really appealing to some folks. And some people love the adventure of living abroad. So that's really appealing for that reason as well. But for other people, that is less appealing for various reasons. So then you are in just a very different career format.
I know I've always just been like confused about the whole thing. And
Totally.
of my teachers, or all teachers that I've had at least, are like, most of the opportunities are in Europe, so head to Europe. And I was like, okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, it's good to know what the options are though.
Absolutely. And you can do both, I mean,
Yeah.
you could do one for a while, you could come back here, you could start here and go over there. You can, if you get to a certain level of international career, then you can be crossing the seas and be a guest artist at various houses. But yeah, for that sort of stability and that sort of regular job feel as a singer is mostly in Europe.
How did Lawrence help you get into this career?
Well, Lawrence, I think, set me up. It gave me the sort of foundation for all of the skills and everything that I need to be an opera singer. It obviously set me up with great music training, our theory sequence, our musicology, our history, like that was all great. The foundations of the voice technical work, voice study, that all, I didn't really have lessons before I went to college. I didn't know what I didn't know until I got to Lawrence. Set me up with a lot of those basics. I also think that it's important to note that going to a liberal arts school and having a lot of emphasis on critical thinking and then for me as an English major as well, like text analysis, time spent with languages and ideas from lots of different disciplines has been really helpful. That's really great when you're thinking about how to create a character on stage, really doing in-depth text analysis, having good critical thinking skills. Some people have to kind of figure some of those things out on the job because they maybe didn't get that training in a variety of disciplines when they were in college. And I think as Laurentians, we have a lot of focus on that. And I think that's really amazing. And the other thing I would mention is that the sense of community has really served me well, has been a support system for me. I still have strong connections with a bunch of my mentors from Lawrence, a ton of friends who I see. I get to see people who are all over the country and the world, who are friends from Lawrence because of my traveling and have really been, sort of my steady rock with the uncertainty of this career. So the people have also been just a huge part of what I've carried with me from my time at Lawrence.
Was there anything you learned outside of the classroom at Lawrence, so in clubs or ensembles?
Well, yeah, I think that because as a freelance singer, we're going to different gigs all the time, we're working with different groups of people constantly. And you have to get together day one and figure out how you're going to communicate and how you're going to interact and, build up some sort of rapport. And I was an RLA at Lawrence. I was involved in all sorts of groups. I worked at the library. Like, I just felt like I was interacting with different people all the time. And because it's a small community, I think there was a real sense that we were all kind of in it together, in that Lawrence bubble together, if you will. So there was there was just a lot of rapport building. And I think that's kind of similar to the feel in an opera gig. It does feel like you're in this little opera bubble when you're doing that. So I think that's great. I think the other thing from ensembles and independent projects and all sorts of other things that I did and was part of at Lawrence, the independent learning. And again, figuring out what motivates me and how to work on things myself and how to be disciplined about that. I really got a lot of that at Lawrence, and it's a huge part of this career.
Yeah, I think Lawrence sets everybody up to be like their own individuals very well and how to like
Absolutely.
work out, not by themselves, but like for themselves almost and just get by like that. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's like such a hard thing to learn, but Lawrence does it so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has the industry changed in the last 5 years, especially due to the pandemic?
I think so, yeah. I think there's a couple of different ways that I see changes in the industry that have affected me or affected companies in general. But, one thing with the pandemic is opera has always been a live art form. And now companies have figured out how to live stream things and, create all sorts of virtual events and a bunch of things that can be great, I think, for audience building, for offering different ways to experience our art form. So I think that's really great. I think there's been a real emphasis on new works. I think that's been building for a while, but I think even more in the last 5 years. And now I would say that I'm seeing, I think with, with George Floyd's murder and a lot of things that happened during the pandemic that brought social justice issues to the fore, opera companies, I don't think that a lot of them are where they need to be, but I think that we've made a lot of steps forward in how much we're thinking about those things in the opera world. Again, some folks more than others, some companies more than others, but tackling works that address social justice issues, that can be a really powerful thing, to see those things on stage. And for singers, I think one of the big changes that's been happening, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, with the idea that it doesn't have to just be one path and that there isn't one right way to do this career. I think there's a really big change that's been happening from the time that I started in this business in terms of the acceptability of having sort of side jobs, side hustles, or equal, jobs that you are equally as passionate about or value just as much as your singing career, but having that alongside being a singer. There's a lot less stigma now about working another job while you're on an opera gig. I think it used to be a thing that it was like, oh, if you're trying to do something else, then you're not really going to make it, you're not all in. And that's just not the case anymore. So, really high level professionals are doing all sorts of other things while they're on gigs and between gigs. So yeah, there's been a couple of big sort of changes in the industry in the last few years. And I think that they're really positive. And I think we have further to go in how we, within the industry, treat singers and artists, how we approach diversity and telling diverse stories, and how we grow more diverse audiences. So I think we have further to go, but I do think we're headed in the right direction.
Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you would like to mention?
It's okay to not know exactly what you want to do or exactly what your career will look like. Also, it's okay to have a really strong idea and be super excited about it and gung-ho headed that direction, and then to make a change and shift. And they're just, things aren't linear. Life, we feel like it marches in one direction and that time is this linear thing, but I think that's not really accurate to how life feels. So I think give yourself a little grace that you're figuring it out, and I'm still figuring it out. And I've been I finished grad school 11 years ago now, and I still feel like I'm sort of figuring out my path. And I never, ever, when I was in college, could have predicted that this is where my career would have taken me as a full-time freelance opera singer. That was just not even anywhere in my world of possibilities, really. So I think, staying open. But then the other thing alongside that is, even if you feel like you don't know, even if you feel like there are just so many possibilities that you don't know what to do, or nothing seems that appealing, or whatever state of confusion you might be in. There's a difference between not knowing and not taking any action. And I think my sort of life philosophy is just do the next right thing. And that is so helpful when you're thinking about big lifelong stuff like careers. You don't have to know everything. And in fact, I think it's impossible to see your destination right now. But if you can just decide what feels like the right thing to do in this moment and then do it, then take that action, do the next step. It'll open up some other possibilities, and then you get to make that choice again. And I think that's really empowering and freeing at the same time. Like, you don't need to know everything, just do the next right thing. So that's my advice for anyone in any field, but especially I think if you're heading into something as uncertain as the performing arts, there's no way that you're gonna know where something will lead you. So try not to stress too much about that, and do what feels good and feels right.
I know that's like super helpful to hear for, first of all, seniors that are graduating in like 2 weeks.
Yes, exactly.
So including myself. Yeah, it's just very helpful to hear that like reassurance that like it's okay. Like even if you don't know right now, like things will still happen how they're supposed to happen.
And
And
nobody else knows either. You're not
yeah,
behind.
exactly.
You're not, you're not alone. Also, you seniors graduating from college right now, having done your last 2 years of school in a pandemic, and my heart goes out to you. I mean, what a crazy time. So yeah, give yourselves a lot of grace. Like, you're doing great. You're
Yeah,
doing great, even if you move back home for several years, even if you're, like whatever your situation is, you're doing fine. Don't give up on yourself, and just one step at a time.
absolutely. Thank you so much for being on our podcast, Jenny. Students, feel free to reach out to her on Viking Connect with any additional questions you have on being a freelance singer. Well, we will see you next time on the LU Career Center podcast.